Değerli arkadaşlarım, değerli katılımcılar, bu akşam, hatta öğleden sonra diyelim, konuğumuz bir bakan, uzun süre bakanlık yapmış, aynı zamanda belediye başkanlığı yapmış, iklim baş müzakerecisi ve ömür boyu çevre aktivisti diyebileceğimiz bir kişi Fransa'dan, Mr. Brice Lalonde. Kendisine hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Bugün burada Şişli Kent Konseyi Ekoloji Meclisi, İklim ve Çevre Çalışma Grubu olarak arkadaşlarımla varız. Bununla birlikte akademiden ve STK'lardan değerli arkadaşlarımız da var. Önce Mr. Lalonde, Bakan Bey bir kendi sunumunu yapacak yaklaşık 20-25 dakika, yarım saat. Ondan sonra da sorularımızı soracağız. Keyifli bir sohbet olacağını düşünüyorum. Biliyorsunuz dünyamız büyük bir baskı altında çevre açısından. Geleceğe umutla bakmak istiyoruz. Bununla ilgili neler yapabiliriz onları konuşmak istiyoruz. Tabii çevredeki baskı, çevrenin üzerindeki baskının en büyük etkeni insanoğlu. Bunu da biliyoruz. Değerli katılımınız için herkese teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you and thank you for your invitation. To say a few words first, to say how things started for me when I was a student. It started for me in 1969 when I had two triggers. One was the moon and the other was the bicycle. The moon because the people up there, they took pictures of the planet Earth. And it was so beautiful, the pictures. And everything outside was so dark and nothing was living. So I thought, if there's one cause you should fight for, is for the planet. And the bicycle, I was living in Paris, the country, the capital of my country. And the politicians, they wanted to build highways in the middle of the city with cars for cars for cars. And they said, you must adapt the cities to the cars. And I thought, of course not. You must adapt the cars for the city, not the city for the cars. And you have to have cities for people walking, pedestrians, not for cars. And there was a big fight started there. We won these battles now. So very fast, we created environmental groups and we linked with environmental groups in other countries. And that came at that time for the first international conference of the United Nations, was in Stockholm in 1972. For those who remember, every 20 years, there was another international conference. So that was Stockholm 72, Rio de Janeiro in 92, and Rio de Janeiro again in 2012. Every 20 years, the world stops and has a look at what's happening. In Rio de Janeiro, 92, it was called the Summit of the Planet. There was 3 important conventions which were agreed upon. One was on climate, the second was on biodiversity, and the third was desertification. The climate negotiation was, of course, very important, but it took a few years before it was ratified. So it was ratified and it started in Berlin in 1995. And after, it took a lot of time to be discussed. There was Kyoto, the Kyoto Convention. It was in 97. And you had to wait until 2015, 5 years ago, to have the Paris Accord. So now we know in the Paris Accord that we have to become neutral, carbon neutral, by the end of the century. This means we should not send any more gases which create the climate change. That's a very, very difficult task in front of us. As you know, climate change is changing. Right now, the climate is changing. The surface of the planet is getting warmer. The sea level is rising. And you're having very violent weather, droughts, floods, or huge storms, hurricanes. There is even now a special Mediterranean hurricanes They are called medicanes. All the animals of the world are moving, going to the south or going to the north to avoid the heat. And it's something very frightening to see, to look at. Now we know what is responsible for the climate change. We know it's greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, the big part of it is carbon dioxide, but also methane, also nitrogen oxide. This is something like 50 billion tons of equivalent carbon dioxide a year. And we have to go to zero. So that's in front of us. When we send the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, a part of it is going to be captured, luckily, by the sea, by trees, or by some rocks. But half of this carbon dioxide is going to stay in the atmosphere forever, for eternity. And that is something people do not know. So each time we add carbon dioxide, a part of it is going to stay and heat up the surface of the planet. That's why we have to go to zero. These gases, they have a main source, which are fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, it's coal, it's oil, petrol, it's some natural gas. Coal is the worst. Gas is the less worse, you would say. But each time you burn these fossil fuels, you add carbon into the atmosphere. So there is absolutely no choice. We have to get rid of fossil fuels. We have to finish the use of fossil fuels. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult because these fossil fuels have made prosperity for the humans for the last 200 years. So we have to abandon these fossil fuels and to go to some other place, use some other resources. In my country, for instance, we have a plan for energy because a lot of it comes from the use of energy or the policy for energy. We think that in 2050, which is in 30 years, we should have our end use of energy, 50% electricity, 50% renewable heat. Heat can come from solar, it can come from geothermal, it can come from heat pumps. There's a lot of sources of renewable heat. 50% heat, because in one country, usually half of the energy is heat. Heat for the houses, heat for factories, for drying food, etc., etc. But the other half is electricity. It's decarbonized electricity. Why electricity? Because electricity can be produced without sending carbon dioxide. That is solar energy for photovoltaic, that is wind energy, that is dams with the water, or it is nuclear. And nuclear, there's a big debate still, because some people don't like nuclear. But the problem now is we have to choose the less of two evils. By the way, I'm working on something called transmutation of nuclear waste, because the problem with the nuclear is the waste, which can last very long. So we have to find a way to reduce the time, the length of the nuclear waste. And that is possible with a technology which is only starting now, which is called transmutation. But not many people believe me, but that's what I am fighting for. And of course, it is better not to waste energy. And so lots of people will say, perhaps you have to be a bit sober. You have to not consume too much. You have to be not greedy. You have to perhaps consume, have a better or a simpler way of living. So there's a big discussion. Is it going to be technology? Is it going to be a way of living? Is it going to be both? Probably it's going to be both. So we have to work on how, for instance, I am not in Istanbul because there is a technology, which is Zoom. We can discuss without me taking an airplane to go to Turkey. So we save energy. So, you know, people are working on how am I going to live? How are we going to work? How are we going to travel in the next years? So this is a very important discussion. The other part of the discussion is, okay, we electrify. So we're going to electrify all the cars. Private cars are going to be electric. But if you want to have electric cars, you have to have the charger. Everybody has to be able to charge its electric car in a way which is as easy, as convenient as the cars which are using gas. So it's something which is going to be difficult. You have to have your charging points everywhere in the city. This is something you have to do. You also have to produce the batteries. So each time you decide to do something to fight climate change, you have a whole set of policy you have to think about. It's going to be much more difficult for some industries. Steel, cement, airplanes, that's going to be more difficult. How are we going to, it's going to come later. It's difficult to get carbon neutral in these industries. But in any case, is another problem, which we have to adapt. Adaptation to climate change is going to be as important as mitigation. And people sometimes don't see that. You're going to have these heat waves. So how are we going to do? If the sea level rises, and it's going to rise, it means that our harbors, our ports, our cities, which are located on the seaside, they'll have to adapt. You have to build differently. So this part of adaptation is very important and must not be forgotten. Of course, if you plant trees, they capture CO2, so it's always good to have trees. And now some companies and some technology are trying to capture CO2 from the atmosphere and pump it, but that's very expensive. And for the time being, it's very small. But perhaps it's going to come in the future, and perhaps, and I think so, perhaps CO2, which we capture from the atmosphere, or which we capture from some factories which produce a lot of CO2, cement, steel. Well, perhaps we can use that CO2, reuse it, and instead of producing fossil fuels, we would produce fuels coming from the carbon of the carbon dioxide. So this is just starting. You have already some companies which are producing pipelines to bring the CO2 from one place to another. You have some companies which are trying to bury underground the CO2 and to transform it in a rock where it would be stored for a very long time. So we are starting to see very interesting innovations which we must push, which we must help to develop. There is a lot of things which are happening, a lot of tactics trying to fight climate change. It's not only energy, it's also the way you build your houses. It's also the way you design your cities to save energy, not to consume too much. It's agriculture, because you know that the more you eat meat, the efficiency of the conversion of plants to animals is quite low. So people say you must not eat too much meat, because otherwise you're going to import meat from Brazil, and they're going to take the grazing land from the forest, etc., etc. So there's lots of discussions and lots of things you can do, and things that people can do themselves, and not only the policy. So there's a lot of discussion. I think I'm not going to stay too long on the climate, because you must understand that we don't only have the climate issue. You have the biodiversity issue. You have the waste issue. For instance, now we need to invent a new economy. We need to have an economy which recycles, instead of trying to always excavate, always to go mining. Instead of going to mine all the time and to make holes in the planet Earth, we should try to use what the waste we produce and to reuse it and have what people call a circular economy. And this is probably coming slowly. Now we are having different laws, the laws which say you must not always run for the new telephone, mobile, for the new technology, because you can still use a lot of what you already have. So wouldn't it be a better idea to be able to repair, to fix the broken part of a product, of a telephone, for instance, of a computer? And so now you have some laws which say you have to be able to repair, to have spare parts of the product, instead of trying to change all the time to have a new one. We also have to change our relation to nature. I give an example. Now we know we need to have nature in good health. Otherwise, if nature is not in good health, humans are not going to be in good health either. We take the examples of the bees, the bees which produce honey. These bees play a very important role in our economy because they pollinate fruits and crops. And if you don't have the bees, you lose 30% of your crops. So the question is, how can we have bees? Probably we cannot give a salary to bees, of course, but perhaps we should have our agriculture to produce enough flowers all the year long, so that you have bees all the time, which they have enough food and they help you to pollinate your crops. This is something, a new way of thinking. How can we pay back nature? For instance, if you have trees, you have water. Water is so important today, of course. And we are going to have more and more problems with water. In some countries, when you buy a bottle of water, in the price of the bottle of water, you have the price of the salary of the forest man, which keeps the forest, because like that you have water. So if you want, now there is a sort of a understanding of how much nature is helpful to our economy. And that's a new way of thinking, which is very important for all of us and for the future of our children. Talking of water, so water, as you know, there's never more water than has always been. We don't produce more water, okay? So we have to use what we have. And there's more and more people on the planet, but always the same amount of water. So the amount of water per person, per people, goes down, of course. There's less and less for the people because there's more people and not more water. So we have to be very careful of that. We have to reuse water. Once we have used water, we have to reuse it. So we have to clean it all the time. It's very important to keep the clean water. Water is available because you have quite a lot of water, but clean water is the problem. It has to be clean. And that's not so easy to keep it always clean. And so now, of course, you have new technology on Mediterranean, which is to desalinate. You desalinate the seawater. Okay, but that's quite a lot of energy. You have to have energy. So there is a, how do you call it, a nexus between energy and water and food. It always goes together. Food, energy, water, it always goes together. So you have to always think of it together. And it's very funny that in lots of governments or lots of cities, the people in charge of energy do not speak with the people in charge of water, etc. So you have to, you have to break the silos and get people together to speak together. So if you desalinate water, okay, but after you have to do something with the salt. It's not so easy. So you put the salt back in the sea, but that creates places in the sea where you have too much salt, and that destroys the fish, etc., etc. So it's very difficult. Desalinate, you have it's like on boats. You have a lot of animals which come to go onto the pipe which takes the water, etc. So you put a lot of pesticide, etc., etc. Nothing is easy. There is a say for environment like for economy. There is no free lunch. Each time you do something, you have to pay for it in one way or another. You have consequences. You must know that. You have very simple says. I remember when I was a young environmentalist, I was reading an American author called Barry Commoner. And Barry Commoner, he said there is a very important thing you have to know about. Everything goes somewhere. Everything goes somewhere. Very simple. Okay, but that's a big law in ecology. Everything goes somewhere. The people who invented the how do you call it, aerosol, well, they thought it was a fantastic product because this product didn't have any chemical reaction with something else. So they thought it was completely free. Fantastic to fight les incendies, Jesus, burning for the far people. And 20 years after, the ozone layer was disappearing because they didn't even think of what was happening after. What do they do after with this product? They didn't think about it. And today, you still have a lot of engineers working to design a fantastic product for a helicopter, for an engine, for whatever, but they don't think of what's happening after. What do they do with this product after? You always now, that's one of the new laws of the economy. When you design a new product for the market, think always of what's going to happen after. What is going to happen with your product after it's been used? Listen, I think I'm going to put an end because otherwise I'll be speaking all the time. I just want to finish with one thing, is that the environment, ecology, nature, you have different scales. You can everybody starts by the place you love. I love this place. I was born here. It's my country, my land. I love it. I want to keep it the way I like it. So it starts that way. And after, you can go to the planet because the planet is in danger also. And of course, when you go to the planet, you have big political problems because you have inequality in the world. You have the very rich country, they consume much more than the very poor country. And so the very poor country says, hey, it's not fair. Why should you ask me to make efforts when you should start? You should show the way. And these discussions have been going on for very, very long. And of course, you have the country who says, you started 1 century ago, so you must start. But the other country says, yes, but you are getting more and more rich, so tomorrow it's going to be you. So that's the frame of the discussion to try to solve the problems of the planet. Unfortunately, there's no government for the planet. There's only 195 countries which discuss. And usually they disagree. So that's the difficulty for you. You have to solve that. It's your generation, for the young people now to solve these problems, political. Thank you.